So let's go ahead and start as we usually do with our prayers. So John will get those online and we can do those together. So again, we're going to start with the recitation of the Heart Sutra, bringing to mind these teachings on emptiness. And also, if you were in the Heart Sutra class or have studied the Heart Sutra, you know that the paths are implicit within this, kind of giving us that hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. It spells out the grounds and paths that we're going to be discussing tonight. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. We'll do the short mandala offering prayer. Again, making a vast pure offering to the Buddhas, our gurus, so we can actualize these teachings in our own minds. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in Bodhichitta, as usual, once in English, and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sunam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Panchir Sangye Duparsho. Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and start with a few minutes of quiet meditation, focusing the mind a bit using the breath as our meditation object. Again, just try to stay present with the breath as best as you can, whatever way you're working with it. When you see the mind has wandered, then gently guide the mind back to the breath. We'll do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set bodhicitta motivation for tonight. So now let's set our motivation for tonight's class. And when we look at the world that we live in particular, in relation to some of what's happened in the United States over the last week or so, with the shootings that have resurged in this country, with the pandemic continuing to go on, with climate change and so many other big issues that are looming on the horizon, it's very easy to point our fingers to the external world and think that that's the problem. And if only we could fix the external world, then everyone would be happy. But of course, this isn't what the Buddha teaches. The Buddha says that the external world is a product of our own minds. Everything begins with the thoughts that we cultivate, the motivations we have for what we do, as well as the actions we engage in on the basis of those motivations. So it all starts with our minds, and this is the way that we will actually change the world, is by changing our own minds. Changing our minds to the greatest degree so we can then help others to do the same work. So the mind of Bodhichitta recognizes that this is the case. And it's a determination for us to move forward with as much kind of tenacity and ability that we can muster to work on ourselves, to develop ourselves to the greatest degree. But we do this not for our own purpose. We do this so we can be of great benefit to others, because we see the suffering in the world. We see how beings are driven to do things out of their own crazy minds, out of their delusions. We want an end to it once and for all. And the end will come when we are able to help others to do the same work, to tame their own minds, to achieve their greatest potential. So in the space of everything that you feel about the world we're living in, bring that motivation of bodhicitta to bear in your mind right now, seeing that it is the answer to all of the world's problems, all the problems throughout all of existence will be rectified when we have that mind and when we engage in classes like we're doing tonight with that motivation of bodhicitta. Okay, good. All right, everyone, welcome again to our fourth class in this series on grounds and paths. Salam, again, is the Tibetan for this study. We've been using the text that is out on the Dropbox, and you can certainly, access it there. I'll be pulling it up on the screen as well as we go through it. In the last class, we finished off we have just a little bit more to tack on for the path of preparation. Recall that again, we have these 5 paths that are the main structure for the progress that the Bodhisattva makes from entering the path through that mind of bodhicitta that is there in an uncontrived way, a spontaneous way. They enter the path of accumulation, and that has 3 levels, and they continue to accumulate their wisdom as well as the positive potential through engaging in virtuous acts, what we would call merit. And then they eventually enter into the path of preparation. And they do that by way of having this union of calm abiding and special insight, this very powerful mind that is very stable, but yet very penetrative into the nature of reality. And it's observing emptiness, still in a conceptual framework, but very powerful in terms of realizing emptiness in a way that causes the bodhisattva to begin that path of preparing for what we're going to get into mostly tonight, which is the path of seeing, where the bodhisattva has that initial direct realization into emptiness. Recall that everything is being laid out in terms of someone who, from the very beginning, enters the Mahayana. If there are those who went through the Hinayana path, the fundamental vehicle, then they would come in and proceed at a slightly different, in a slightly different way, because they will have realized emptiness already, because emptiness has to be realized on either the Mahayana or the Hinayana to achieve the path of no more learning with regard to each of those. So it's the same wisdom, it's just again a different motivation. Those who are entering the Hinayana want to attain their self-liberation. Those who are entering the Mahayana want to attain the goal of great enlightenment, complete enlightenment for the sake of others. So let's go ahead and return to the slides that I'd prepared. I didn't get, again, quite to the complete end of the path of preparation. We talked last week about the 4 levels of it. Again, I won't be reviewing all of that and what happens with the wisdom realizing emptiness as the Bodhisattva continues to cultivate their mind on the path of preparation. Again, we're in this divisions within this threefold outline of Mahayana grounds and paths. We had the definitions of grounds and paths. Now we're looking at the divisions, which are the causal grounds, which are the 4 accumulation, preparation, seeing, and meditation, and then the resultant ground, which would be the path of no more learning, where one attains Buddhahood. So within that, we were in the Mahayana causal grounds. Within that, we are looking at the grounds of Bodhisattva common beings. Common meaning that they have not yet realized emptiness. They're not superiors. They don't have that superior insight into the emptiness, having cultivated that direct realization. So we went through, again, paths of accumulation. We're now in paths of preparation. And this is the last bits that I want to share on this. These are some other aspects of the Mahayana path of preparation. So even though the path of preparation is characterized by its realization of emptiness and dependence on a conceptual meditative stabilization, that is a union of calm abiding and special insight. Remember, that's how the Bodhisattva enters into it, and they continue to cultivate a deeper and deeper meditative stabilization on emptiness, still in a conceptual framework. Bodhisattvas also meditate on love, compassion, the 6 perfections, and so forth, just as they do on all the learner paths. So again, keep that in mind. That's going to be the case for all of these 4 causal grounds, these 4 paths that before one becomes a Buddha, you still have to engage in all these sorts of things. And of course, engage in your practice of the perfections, engaging in generosity, patience, morality, what have you, and accumulating merit. Bodhicitta on the Mahayana path of preparation is called fire-like. This was the case when we looked at the first of the 4 levels of the path of preparation. It was called heat because it was indicating that we are starting to generate the heat that will result in the path of seeing that will burn through our first level of obstructions that are removed at that level. So fire-like here is the reference to bodhicitta on the entire path of preparation, all 4 levels, because as it says there, although bodhisattvas on this level are not yet able to accomplish the elimination of the obstructions, they start to burn the firewood, in quotes, of the obstructions by undermining the different conceptions of inherent existence. Remember that we went through, as I said, on the 4 levels, how we kind of pick apart the different types of manifest conceptions that we might have around various phenomena. And then we try to reduce those so that they are suppressed and won't arise. So it's kind of setting the stage for the fire that will occur on the path of seeing. So anyway, this is, as I mentioned, there are these 22 similes. They're spelled out in a couple of different books, but I'll try to provide an entire list by the time we get to the end of all of this, that these 22 similes for how bodhicitta grows. It started as being earth-like, and then it went on to, it wasn't moon-like yet, I don't think, because that's on the 3rd one. I can't remember the 2nd one. Anyway, it keeps growing and developing. So we've only seen 4 of them so far. The 5th one will be for the first ground, the path of seeing. So the bodhicitta, again, it's the same thought, if you will. It just becomes stronger and stronger in terms of its motivational force that can help us to progress on the path. So now we're going to enter into the grounds of Bodhisattva superiors. So we leave behind what were the common beings, paths or grounds, and we move on to what will essentially entail the path of seeing and the path of meditation, because the resultant ground of the path of no more learning is, of course, its own separate category in our outline here that's in front of you. So in terms of the grounds of Bodhisattva superiors, I need to go through some terminology because we're going to see these coming up even almost from the very beginning, like the very first page of our little description around these grounds of the Bodhisattva superiors includes the term meditative equipoise. So I need to go through and define some of these so that as we go through, I don't necessarily need to, stop and do that. And I think it is useful to have a description of them to work with from the beginning. So in general, when we use the term meditative equipoise or meditative equipoise path, what we're referring to, literally in the Tibetan, it means exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise. It refers to a meditative stabilization that once more is a union of that very stable mind of calm abiding. And of course, calm abiding usually is referred to as that state you attain after the 9 mental abidings, but it includes any of the concentrations that are built on the basis of calm abiding. They are all in the nature of shamatha. They all have a mind that can abide in that calm, that peace. It's just they become more and more refined as the bodhisattva or whoever develops their mind through deeper concentrations. But it will have a union of that stability of mind and special insight, again, which is that ability to penetrate deeply into the nature of reality on the basis of a stable mind. And here, again, it is directly realizing emptiness. So we wouldn't use meditative equipoise prior to the path of seeing. Why? Because the bodhisattva who has freshly entered the Mahayana path will not have a union of calm abiding and special insight directly realizing emptiness until that point. It will always be conceptual prior to that, as we saw when we went through the path of preparation. So this is a term that is used to refer to that specific type of meditation where one is observing emptiness in a direct way. And we'll talk more about what that means to say a direct realization. Secondly, the second bullet point on there, it is a non-dualistic awareness. Why? Because it is free of the appearance of inherent existence. This is one way we talk about dualism. Let me go through all three and then I'll come back and talk about each of them. Secondly, it is free of the appearance of conventional truths. It's also free of the sense that the object and the object and its subject. Didn't proofread this one good enough tonight either. I did all these slides today and I went through them once or twice, but so it's the object and its subject are separate and cut off. So these are usually the three ways that we talk about dualistic appearance in the Prasangika Madhyamaka tradition, which again is what we are studying here with this view of how the Bodhisattva proceeds through the paths. The first one, appearance of inherent existence. Recall that earlier on, I talked about how we have two different levels of obstructions. One are the afflictive obstructions, which is the ignorance grasping at that inherent existence, as well as all the other afflictions that are based on that. And of course, there's seeds, the seeds of those that have been planted that cause them to arise again. The afflictive obstructions are, those things generated through the force of our deluded minds that are continuing to generate that conviction in this false appearance. The false appearance is part of the knowledge obstructions. And recall that again, that arises from these subtle imprints that have been imprinted on the mind from beginningless time due to our having had that ignorance. These imprints arise in terms of that false appearance. So anything that appears before us, your computer screen or whatever is in front of you right now, me, all the various phenomena that appear, they all appear to exist from their own side. That false appearance, when one enters into meditative equipoise, falls away. We no longer have any falsity to what we are observing and apprehending. The mind at that time is realizing emptiness, and emptiness is a negation of inherent existence. In the space of a negation of inherent existence, the appearance of inherent existence can't exist because it is overcome by that truth, by that realization of the truth. So any time we're in meditative equipoise, there is no false appearance whatsoever of inherent existence. That was the first one. The second one had to do with let me pull it back up on the screen so we can keep referring back to the slides, the appearance of conventional truths. They say that in the space of the meditative equipoise reeling emptiness, because emptiness is the only thing appearing to it, emptiness is an ultimate truth. That's why nothing that is conventional can appear to that mind, because conventional truths are what we are analyzing to see if they exist inherently, and we come to see that they don't. So if they were found by that meditative equipoise, they would appear, but they are not found. The lack of any inherently existent phenomena means that there's nothing we can find that is that phenomenon, that withstands analysis. This is why when we read the Heart Sutra tonight, many of you will recall this from our study of the Heart Sutra, when we say, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, and so on, and no eye, no ear, no nose, no suffering, no this, no that. We're saying that in the face of that meditative equipoise, none of these conventionalities appear. They cannot be there, because if they did appear there, again, they would have inherent existence, but they don't. They lack that. And the only thing that is appearing to the mind of that meditator in this meditative equipoise is emptiness, is a negation, a lack of inherent existence. And it's appearing once more in a non-dualistic way, where there's not the appearance of inherent existence, there's not the appearance of any conventional truths, and thirdly, there's not the appearance of a distinct subjective awareness and an object that is being known. Right now in our everyday, functioning, we all have dualistic appearance at that level as well, right? We don't have the feeling that the objective world and the subjective awareness that is our own consciousness have somehow stopped being delineated as separate. This is the experience that the Bodhisattvas go through, or anyone goes through, when they have a meditative equipoise on emptiness, is they use this term of, it's like water poured into water. The object being known, emptiness, and the subjective awareness knowing it merge as if one. And there's none of that delineation that would be another sense of dualism. So dualism here has to do with all three of those. There's no longer any appearance of inherent existence. There's no longer any appearance of conventionalities. And there's no longer any appearance of the sort of distinctness of subject and object. It's not to say that subject and object aren't distinct, because they are. Conventionally, we can refer to something as a subjective awareness and something as an object being known. But in the space of that meditative equipoise, it's not dualistic at all. It's emerging together so that there is a single unitary experience of the object emptiness and the mind realizing it. This is what becomes so powerful about it, as we're going to see when we get deeper into the path of seeing and discuss what occurs there. So this is the nature of a meditative equipoise path, or simply what we usually call meditative equipoise. A meditative equipoise, in turn, can be subdivided into an uninterrupted path and what is in our text called a liberated path. I think the term we generally use is path of release in a lot of our studies, but just again, substitute the idea of path of release for liberated path. I usually put it up there anyway, but both of these, an uninterrupted path and a liberated path, are meditative equipoise paths directly realizing emptiness. So they're not being differentiated in terms of what is emptiness is appearing to both of them. It's just that we're going to delineate them in terms of what is happening in the moment of there being an uninterrupted path versus what will follow, what is subsequent to that, which is a liberated path or a path of release. So let's take a look at each of these and get an idea of what they're about. And then I'll also go to the chart that we've been using, that we've been referring to from Nalanda Monastery, and point out where they're happening on there. In general, an uninterrupted path refers to a meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness that is doing what? It's eliminating particular objects of abandonment. That is, any of the different layers of afflictive or knowledge obstructions. Remember, I went through those a couple of classes ago, and I just mentioned them earlier tonight. They are divided into various levels, and even afflictive is divided into two parts, those that are intellectually acquired, those that are innate. And anyway, those obstructions are removed in layers. They're removed in portions. And it gets subtler and subtler the further you go in terms of developing these uninterrupted paths that act as the antidote to those, that they are the force through which they are eliminated. So what, as it says in the second bullet point, whatever is an uninterrupted path is necessarily a path of seeing or a path of meditation. And why is that? Because there are none on the path of no more learning, since Buddhas have attained the complete cessation of all obstructions. So let me pull up the chart here and kind of give you an idea of why that is so you're kind of clear about that. Actually, I left this on the text. I'm going to have to pull up. There it is. Okay. So again, there are no meditative equipoises prior to the path of seeing. Why? Because the Bodhisattva does not yet have a direct realization of emptiness, and a meditative equipoise is always a direct realization of emptiness. They begin on these herringbone things that are here. If you notice on the little chart down there, it says that for the ones that are going from either up at the left and down to the right, that's the uninterrupted path. The ones that go down from the left and up to the right are the path of release, or again, the liberated path. So you'll see that they start over here with the path of seeing, with the very initial meditative equipoise, where one has those two components. We're right now talking about the uninterrupted path, which is the first of those from left to right. Then there will be another one in the path of meditation, another one, all the way up through the final uninterrupted path, which actually occurs on the 10th ground. There is no uninterrupted path on the path of no more learning, because the Bodhisattva crosses over from the uninterrupted path into a path of release, a liberated path, which is the state of Buddhahood. And a Buddha does not need to be cultivating uninterrupted paths any longer. They have the wisdom realizing emptiness in their mind stream all the time, but there's nothing more to remove. Everything will have been removed when one gets to the path of no more learning. So this was saying again that there are uninterrupted paths. If it is an uninterrupted path of the Bodhisattva, it would necessarily be on the Mahayana path of seeing or path of meditation. It cannot be on the path of no more learning. And of course, it certainly can't be on the path of accumulation or preparation, simply because, again, you haven't yet had it on those two paths, and you don't need it when you get to the path of no more learning. All right. Let's take a look at the slides again then and go into a little bit more on these two. First, a bit more on the uninterrupted path. Why is it called uninterrupted? Because this meditative equipoise remains present without interruption or intervals until whichever obstructions it is to eliminate are actually eliminated. It kind of, stays in that mode of directly realizing emptiness as like a force until you've created the appropriate level of force to remove the layer that you are involved in, depending on where you are at in the path of seeing, path of meditation, what have you, all the way up to the end of the path of meditation. The moment they are eliminated, it says, and the cessation of those particular obstructions is achieved, the uninterrupted path becomes a liberated path. You have just that continuity of awareness. It's still a meditative equipoise, but it moves from the uninterrupted path, where one is the mind realizing emptiness directly is acting as an antidote to a particular level of obstructions, to the path of release, or the liberated path, where it has actually been abandoned. And we'll go through that in a moment. That's on the next slide. All right. So when we talk about the liberated path, or the path of release, in general, once more, we can say that it too refers to a meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. We saw this a few slides ago, right? Both the uninterrupted path and the liberated path are meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. But the distinction here is that this arises immediately after an uninterrupted path. That uninterrupted path has developed the strength to counteract the level of obstructions that it is working against. The next moment is the path of release. As it says in the second bullet point, that liberated path arises when the obstructions that are to be eliminated by the uninterrupted path that precedes it are actually eliminated. That is, when the elimination or cessation of those obstructions is attained. So a liberated path is kind of, the first moment of with the uninterrupted path is the antidote to it, but this is the conclusion to it, if you will, the fact that it has been removed. The analogy that sometimes is used is that if you had a thief in your house and you threw them out the door, you had that force of might to be able to expel them from your house so that they wouldn't continue to steal from you. That's the uninterrupted path that expels them from the house. The closing of the door is what happens with the liberated path, because it means that then the thief will not return. There's an absolute cessation at that point that is, firm. It will, through the force of both of these, you have been able to then expel that level of the obstructions and make it so that there's a complete cessation of it, that it will no longer recur again. So these are the two parts of the meditative equipoise. This second one is called a liberated path. Why? Because it's completely released or freed from whatever objects of abandonment were removed by the uninterrupted path that preceded it. It's got that level of freedom then, because you've shut the door. You don't have to worry about it ever returning. Whatever is a liberated path is necessarily one of the three: a path of seeing, a path of meditation, or a path of no more learning. So I did mention this when we had the chart up, but let me pull the chart up once more just to go through why the path of release would be on the three paths. The uninterrupted paths are only path of seeing and path of meditation, right? So for the path of release, or the liberated path, that's again the second part of the herringbone pattern there. And so you have a path of release that occurs on the path of seeing. You have several that occur on the path of meditation. You get to the final path of release. It's not marked here as herringbones, the other side of it, but that is what occurs once you cross over this uninterrupted path that is at the end of the continuum of the 10th ground. It is the last moment of a sentient being and becomes, in the liberated path, the first moment of a Buddha. The mental awareness of a Buddha, the continuum of a Buddha. So there is a path of release on the path of no more learning, and you abide there. It's not like you just then hang out with that. And of course, you have all of the other paths of release that have occurred that are together with that are in a state of complete freedom from all of the obstructions once one has entered into the path of no more learning. Okay. So I think I've got a little more terminology to go through, and then we'll be able to actually get into our text and discuss what we need to discuss tonight. The third term that I want to discuss is what's, or actually fourth, because we had meditative equipoise, and then it's two parts: uninterrupted path, liberated path. So now subsequent attainment. A subsequent attainment path, literally exalted wisdom of subsequent attainment, again, if we were to translate the Tibetan, refers to the conceptual awareness that arises after the meditative equipoise of the Arya Bodhisattva ceases. So when one is in meditative equipoise, it is non-conceptual. That's what makes it a direct realization. When one comes out of that meditation, the conceptual mind returns. It is a conceptual awareness after the meditative session. And upon that happening, as it says there, it does not directly realize emptiness because it's not non-conceptual. It's not a direct realization, but it has the appearance of conventional truths once again. That dualistic manner returns to the mind, such as conventional bodhicitta might be meditated on, great compassion, generosity, and so forth, that arise in the continuum of the Arya Bodhisattva. And of course, they're now called an Arya Bodhisattva, a superior Bodhisattva, because they have cultivated that profound wisdom on the path of seeing, or whenever they've had their direct realization of emptiness. That will be the first one, but they're an Arya Bodhisattva once they've developed a meditative equipoise, once they have actually realized emptiness directly. So the idea here is that when you come out of that meditation, you return to your sort of, quote, normal world, but the mind is no longer normal. The mind has had this non-dualistic experience and is seeing things very differently, but conventionalities will return in terms of their appearance. Also, the appearance of inherent existence will return. And of course, the other dualistic component, which is the sense of subject and object, also returns. So there is, again, a return to a dualistic mode of operating, but it is informed by, of course, the wisdom realizing emptiness that occurred on meditative equipoise. But every one of our paths every one of our grounds, sorry, I should say grounds at that point, when we refer to these 10 grounds, all of them have a session of a subsequent attainment. So that's the blank part here, in which we have written the various perfections that are practiced at that level. So for the path of seeing, one has meditative equipoise that causes one to enter into the path of seeing. Then one has subsequent attainment, the white period that follows. Then one will generate eventually the meditative equipoise that will act as the antidote to the next level of obstructions, which will then cause one to move into the second ground, as well as when that begins, the path of meditation. But then one cultivates eventually the second ground. There is a subsequent attainment for the second ground, and so on. Every one of these has a white period, and in that period is when the Bodhisattva engages in collecting merit and other, practices that will help them to progress on the path. But it is not going to serve, they're not going to have another meditative equipoise that serves as an antidote for the next level of the obstructions until they've accumulated enough merit and their wisdom is strong enough to burn through another layer, to go through another level of those. So subsequent attainment happens on every one of these 10 grounds, okay? So let me just share a little bit more on that. Like I said, then we'll be ready to go into, actually that was it. Okay, good. Wasn't sure I had another one. So let me stop it there and go to our text. Again, last time we left off on page 13 of the text. This is where this outline begins. That is looking at the Bodhisattva superiors. Again, their grounds and paths. Whoops, it's not exactly what I wanted to put up yet. I've got to wait for that little menu thing to disappear so I can, it's not going to do it for me. Whoops, that isn't what I wanted to do either. That's not what I really wanted to do either. Where is my text? There it is. Okay, sorry. Bodhisattva superiors. As was pointed out in the outline that was just on the screen with the slides, there are 3 parts: definitions, divisions, and an explanation of the meaning of the individual divisions. That's going to be the explanation of the 10 grounds, because again, the first ground starts with the path of seeing, and then all the remaining grounds again spell out over the path of meditation. The first ground also overlaps again with the path of meditation briefly, but and then we'll go into those in much more detail when we get to them. But right now we're going to look first at the definitions. So the definition of a Bodhisattva superior's ground, or Arya Bodhisattva's ground is how we would normally refer to it, is a Bodhisattva superior's exalted knower, which is affected by both the wisdom directly realizing emptiness and great compassion. It is kind of interesting that they say great compassion, they don't say bodhicitta. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe this would be something that would come up in the debates that are in the second part of this that isn't translated. Great compassion is obviously unique to the Mahayana already, so maybe by virtue of that, they don't feel that they need to, specify bodhicitta, because those on the Hinayana path don't generate great compassion. Recall that great compassion is the root of bodhicitta. It is not just the wish that others be free from their suffering, but it is the taking responsibility for that, thinking I will protect them from sufferings, I will remove them from suffering and the causes of suffering. So anyway, I don't know, again, there's not much to say about that definition other than the idea that it is affected by both a direct realization of emptiness and having great compassion, and of course bodhicitta in the mind of that being. That's what makes it a bodhisattva superior. The two, a bodhisattva superior's ground and a bodhisattva superior's path, are synonyms. As we saw earlier, ground and path are synonyms. They're both referring to consciousnesses, though we can delineate them sometimes in terms of grounds being more the support for qualities developing, and paths not having necessarily that quality or that definition. The definition of an ultimate ground of a bodhisattva superior is a bodhisattva superior's non-conceptual exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise, whose entity is non-contaminated and which is affected by great compassion, its accompanier. So when we talk about the ultimate grounds are the meditative equipoise. They're the herringbones. Remember that we were talking about on the chart. When we talk about the ultimate grounds, those are the portions of the 10 grounds where we are having an exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise, whose entity is non-contaminated and affected by great compassion. Now there will be, again, an addendum to that in terms of there are meditative equipoise, periods of meditative equipoise on emptiness that aren't necessarily acting as an antidote to a level. We're going to see that in a moment when we look at the divisions of the meditative equipoise. But anyway, don't worry about that for right now. Just know that again, in general, we can say that it is the herringbone parts, which again I had up here. Let me put that back up. These parts here would be essentially the ultimate grounds of the 10 grounds, the paths of seeing and meditation. Every one of these that is a herringbone there is part of what we mean by that in terms of that term, ultimate grounds. Moreover, Chandrakirti's, I don't know, I was getting ready to say auto, so I said Chandrakirti, sorry. Chandrakirti's auto commentary, that's his self-commentary that he did on his own text, supplement to Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way, says, when just the non-contaminated wisdom of bodhisattvas, which is affected by compassion and so forth, is divided into parts, they attain the name grounds. Why? As I said earlier, because of serving as bases for good qualities. So again, the 10 grounds encompass the entirety of the path of seeing and path of meditation, and they are given those names of grounds because they are the basis for things that grow from them. Just like we talked about, that being why we call these grounds as just like the earth is the support for the trees and fruit that grows from it and what have you. So that's, again, just referring to why this term grounds is being used more specifically to refer to those 10 that are encompassed in these two paths, path of seeing and path of meditation. Again, these are the superior grounds of a bodhisattva. Then there's a little paragraph here that says, moreover, although the exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise of bodhisattva superiors and the exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise of fundamental vehicle superiors are similar in realizing reality directly without being polluted by predispositions of ignorance, the difference of whether or not they are posited as ultimate Mahayana grounds is through the force of their being or not being under the other influence of great compassion and having or not having capacities, such as what we're going to see when we get to the grounds, the 12 sets of 100 qualities and so on. So again, what that's essentially saying is that there is a similarity to the meditative equipoise that occurs for those on the fundamental vehicle or the Hinayana who are using their wisdom realizing emptiness to move through their path of seeing and their path of meditation to attain their path of no more learning. But there is a huge difference in terms of the force with which the Mahayana meditative equipoise of the Bodhisattva superiors is being driven by the influence of great compassion, bodhicitta, and so on, and therefore developing all these amazing qualities as the Bodhisattva moves through those grounds. We'll see that when we get to the grounds again, all the amazing qualities that are generated by the Bodhisattva as they progress forward. Not only that, but there is said to be a very great difference with respect to directly realizing or not realizing suchness from having made the mind vast or not having made it vast with respect to the meaning of the profound emptiness by way of training in limitless numbers of reasonings on the meaning of suchness, that is to say, the two selflessnesses, selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena other than persons, at the time of the paths of accumulation and preparation. So if you had to decide, well, which was which, it says here there is a distinction in terms of having made the mind vast or not having made the mind vast with respect to the meaning of emptiness. Well, we should all very easily know that it's only on the Mahayana path that one makes one's mind vast by engaging in a variety of techniques to analyze emptiness and suchness. And we often talk about some of the basic techniques that are taught in the Lam Rim, for example. But there are a variety of ways. And if you have any curiosity, again, I keep pointing to, and I'll actually be referring to some passages from Meditation on Emptiness by Jeffrey Hopkins, where he goes into a lot of the different reasonings that are used that were set out by the Buddha. The Bodhisattva engages in that vast survey of all these techniques to strengthen the realization of emptiness and also to be able to help others through providing a variety of means to realize this profound topic. So here I am going to provide a few quotes from the text that is Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti's text that was just mentioned. There is a translation of it that occurs in a book that was published many years ago as Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism, and I don't know if it's still around in that form. But he says, to establish that even a single phenomenon does not truly exist, Mahayanists use limitless different reasonings as set forth in Chandrakirti's text, the treatise on the Middle Way. Hence, their minds become greatly broadened with respect to suchness or emptiness. Again, we'll hear this word suchness used occasionally. Suchness, thusness, emptiness, selflessness, they're all referring to the same negation in the Prasangika Madhyamaka school, a negation of an inherently existent phenomenon or person or whatever. So again, this is pointing out that bodhisattvas use these limitless different reasonings. They engage in as many reasonings as possible to broaden their awareness and their wisdom. Hinayanists use only brief reasoning to establish suchness by valid cognition. And since they do not establish emptiness the way Mahayanists do, they do not have a mind broadened with respect to suchness. So this is what our text was essentially saying, is that you have those who are on the Mahayana path who engage in these limitless reasonings and thereby strengthen their grounds on the Mahayana path that are very different than the grounds of a Hinayanist that are proceeding towards the goal of foe destroyer or arhat, which is their path of no more learning. Therefore, Nagarjuna, in his original text, the Treatise on the Middle Way, sets forth a difference of vastness or abbreviation and of fully or not fully meditating on selflessness. This difference arises because, again, those on the Hinayana, the hearers and solitary realizers, strive to abandon only the afflictions, the obstructions to liberation. And cognizing a mere abbreviation of the meaning of suchness is sufficient for that. They don't have to engage in all of these extensive reasonings and understand emptiness inside and out. They have to arrive at the same realization that the bodhisattvas do. But they don't require that because they're only removing the afflictive obstructions, whereas the bodhisattvas need to go on to remove the knowledge obstructions, those that obstruct omniscience, the state of Buddhahood. All right. Then Mahayanists are intent on abandoning the obstructions to omniscience. And for that, it is necessary to have a very broadened mind of wisdom open to suchness. So again, what I just said in relation to the previous slide. Okay, so I think that's it for that. Let's go on then. I think that ended the definitions section of our text. Let's go to the divisions, and maybe we'll have time to at least get that started before we have our break. So let me scroll down here. We're at the bottom of page 13. We see that there are the divisions of the grounds of Bodhisattva superiors. And it starts out by saying there are 10. And that's because if we look at the grounds, the grounds that are set out on our chart, again, from the path of seeing, which begins here with the initial entry into the path of seeing, second ground, third ground, fourth, all the way up through the 10th. You can say that there are 10 divisions of the grounds of superiors, of Arya Bodhisattvas, as it's labeled at the top there. So that's one way of looking at it. And we're going to see that we can also look at it in terms of the two paths, because that's the other division that this part of the outline is indicating, the path of seeing and path of meditation. So there are 10 because there are these 10. The first, very joyful. The second, the stainless. The third, the luminous. The fourth, the radiant. Let me take it up a little bit. The fifth, difficult to overcome, the 6th, the manifest, the 7th, the gone afar, the 8th, the immovable, the 9th, good intelligence. I think we have a slightly different name for ours on the one chart. I realize that that chart from Nalanda doesn't actually have the names of the grounds on it. The previous one did, and there we define, or the name for it was gone beyond, the 9th. But anyway, gone beyond, good intelligence, both very noble names. And the 10th, which is clouds of doctrine. So, moreover, it says, with regard to the division into the 10 grounds, there is division due to the enhancement of good qualities on later levels over former ones. That as the Bodhisattva progresses, they do generate greater qualities. So there is that difference. They're not equal in terms of every ground being identical to the previous one. There actually are greater qualities the more that the Bodhisattva continues to progress towards the final ground and then into the Buddha ground. These are the feature of the number of good qualities increasing higher and higher, the feature of the majesty of power increasing higher and higher. Third, the feature of a surpassing mode of practicing the 10 perfections. And fourth, the feature of the mode of taking fruitional rebirths. And it says and so forth, but these are the 4 main categories. I'm not going to go into them right now because we're going to see them when we get to the 10 grounds and the presentation of the individual grounds that will follow after we go through the path of seeing and path of meditation in general. And then we go into the down into the grass and take a deeper look at the detail of what's occurring on each of the 10 grounds. So we do have these 4 that are indicated. Again, the good qualities changing, becoming incrementally larger, the majesty of power becoming higher, the mode of practicing the 10 perfections becomes greater, more and more surpassing. You might wonder, why are there 10 perfections? I thought there were 6. Well, we'll get to that, but you can see them on your chart. They are set out there. And then the feature of taking fruitional rebirths, how many rebirths and those sorts of things that would be able to benefit other beings. So, however, it says, since there does not exist even a slight difference with regard to the mode of the 10 ultimate grounds, seeing the pure reality or pure nature, reality, divisions are not made by way of differences of dissimilar entities, objects of observation, or aspects of those ultimate grounds. So when we talked about ultimate grounds, remember we were talking about these portions of mainly the portions of these that are the meditative equipoise, the herringbones on each of these. And then, as I said, you could include other meditative equipoise that are not an uninterrupted path or a liberated path. We'll see that in a moment. But the idea is that any meditative equipoise realizing emptiness that is on any of these 10 grounds is not differentiated in terms of its object of observation, its aspect in terms of what it is realizing, how it is realizing it, or anything that would differentiate it as an ultimate ground. The grounds are differentiated more on the basis of what qualities are manifest when one is in subsequent attainment, when one is outside of that meditative equipoise. Of course, each session of meditative equipoise that is these individual herringbones as one progresses from left to right will actually, remove another layer, a subtler layer of the obstructions. So it's just, that's what's occurring. But the Bodhisattva's qualities are growing. Their majesty of power is growing. All those things that we looked at just a few minutes ago. So let's go ahead and take a break there, I think. We're going to get into this little sutra quote and stuff, and there's another little passage that I'm going to have to do a little more explanation on. I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can. So let's go ahead. It's what's almost 8 o'clock here in Santa Fe. So let's say let's go with 8:09. So about 9 minutes after the hour. So again, have a good break. Okay, part 2 of tonight. So I noticed there was one question in the chat box, but maybe I'll even check in and see if there are any questions yet. We haven't quite finished this point that we were just working with in terms of ultimate grounds not being distinguished one from another versus the grounds in general having these different progressions of qualities. But the question was raised just in terms of clarifying what we mean by superior. This whole section is called the grounds of Bodhisattva superiors. And we are trying to delineate the difference between what we called, again, the common bodhisattva, which would be the normal term that I think is used as ordinary bodhisattva. We're not meaning that a bodhisattva is an ordinary person like everyone else, or they'd say in Australia, right, an ordinary bloke, right? Right, John? Just an ordinary bloke, and just some guy walking down the street. What we're saying is that they're ordinary in terms, or common in terms of not yet having the superior insight into emptiness, which is, again, the direct realization of emptiness. Superior is usually the translation for this word Arya, Sanskrit word. Just a little tidbit that you may have even heard before is that the word Arya, of course, was stolen by the Hitler and Nazi Germany to refer to the Aryan nation. It meant the superior nation. That's why they use that word, is because it had this connotation of being a superior race of people. Well, here we're not meaning that. We're meaning superior internally in terms of realization. So anyone who is an Arya, sometimes it's even referred to as a noble being, the Four Noble Truths, that's where the word Arya also is used. They just define it there as noble. But Arya means someone who possesses that superior insight into emptiness through having realized it directly, non-conceptually. So they are delineated as very different from a common or ordinary being because of that wisdom. And it is significant. I mean, they say once you enter into that meditative equipoise where you realize emptiness for the first time, we're going to get to that later tonight when we talk about the path of seeing, you come out the other side a very different person in terms of your awareness of that reality is very profound. It isn't even anything you can put words on. The can't really speak to it, and you see things very differently. That false appearance that is there of things existing inherently, you don't believe in it for a second, because you know through your superior insight that it doesn't exist that way at all. So it's quite a delineation here then between what we would call an ordinary being or ordinary bodhisattva, ordinary or common, and then superior or Arya. Okay, so that's what we mean. And whenever we use the word superior, generally, that's what we're referring to. I'll point it out if we use it and it means something else. Were there any other questions on anything we talked about so far tonight before we carry on? Okay, then let's
John,
go.
sorry.
Oh, yes. Yeah, John.
I did have a question. I was trying to write it, but I couldn't actually uh, write it very well.
Mhm.
But look, I just understood that a direct realization of emptiness would be to see both sides, so to see like that the object is, or that the reality is not inherently existent, but also to see, well, it's the two truths.
Mhm.
That's what I thought. If you understood that um, that the phenomenon doesn't exist inherently, but it does exist dependently.
Mhm.
Is that, am I what I just,
So, okay, that's a good question. I think I get what you're driving at, John. I'll provide my answer, and then if I haven't addressed what you're speaking to, then let me know. But technically, what is happening is when one is in meditative equipoise, as I mentioned earlier, the only thing that is appearing to the mind of that bodhisattva is ultimate truth. So the only thing that one is realizing in the space of that is the lack of inherent existence, emptiness. When one comes out of that meditative equipoise into subsequent attainment, conventionalities appear then, and the bodhisattva at that point, certainly after that first one, even, but without a doubt, as they progress on the path, they know that everything that appears to exist conventionally is appearing false. It appears to have inherent qualities, inherent existence, but it doesn't have that at all. Therefore, it is merely imputed. It is a dependent arising. It arises in dependence upon causes and conditions, parts, and in the end, the subtlest way through mere designation, mere conceptuality. So I would say that in the meditative equipoise on emptiness, when one is having direct realization of emptiness, none of that is appearing, because those are all referring to the conventional modes of things existing. Those are referring to conventional truths. The only time that you would have the two minds appearing, or the two objects appearing simultaneously, both ultimate truth and conventional truth, is when you become a Buddha. That's actually what these subtlest obscurations are blocking you from doing, is knowing the two truths simultaneously. It's only the mind of a Buddha that is capable of knowing those. In the sutra presentation, I think in Tantra they would contest that a little bit and say that there are moments on the Tantric path where you're able to hold, through the practice of deity yoga and visualizing yourself as a Buddha, a multiple awareness of both conventional truth and ultimate truth of emptiness, because all of that is arising within the sphere of an understanding of emptiness, a wisdom realizing emptiness. But let's not talk about Tantra so much. Just stick with our sutra presentation, which is essentially saying that when you are in meditative equipoise, only ultimate truth is appearing. When you are out of meditative equipoise, only conventional truth is appearing. If you go back into a meditative equipoise, ultimate truth appears. If you move out of that, then conventional truth appears. And you go back and forth between these two appearances of these, and then you eventually are able to unite and know both conventionalities, conventional truth, and ultimate truth simultaneously on the Buddha ground. Okay.
So a direct realization of emptiness is
Mhm.
not necessarily then seeing both truths simultaneously.
And I would go further to say it is necessarily not seeing both truths. It is only seeing the ultimate truth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because again, even though we use the technique of dependent arising to realize emptiness, it is emptiness that is the ultimate truth we're realizing through examining how things exist conventionally. So we're staying in the realm of kind of working with how things exist conventionally to get to a place where we can realize the ultimate truth, which is on the other side of that, which is complementary to that. No independent existence because things exist dependently. And so we have that ability again in our conceptual mind to move back and forth between these two. When we get to a place where we finally realize that ultimate truth, emptiness, directly, non-conceptually, that's the only thing that appears to us. Everything over here that got you into that mode of understanding that through analyzing conventionalities and what have you, that doesn't appear. The only thing that can appear is the wisdom, is the ultimate truth, uh, emptiness, that
But
object.
sorry to labor it, I just, maybe it'd be too long, but so there's really three states. Is this the way I see it? Like conventional truth, ultimate truth, and another state, which is seeing both of them at the same time.
Which would only exist in the mind of a Buddha, correct, that
And
third one. Yeah.
yeah, and it's
In a sutra presentation, that would only exist in the mind of a Buddha. Mhm. Yeah.
okay. Thanks, Todd.
All right, sure, John. Good question. Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah, so great explanation and great question. That kind of begs another question, though. When we look at the definition of the ultimate path of a bodhisattva superior,
Mm-hmm.
that's a non-conceptual, exalted wisdom of meditative equipoise, but it's affected by great compassion, its accompanier. So it seems like a little bit contradictory to me anyways, that you have a meditative equipoise purely observing emptiness, and yet in the ultimate path of the Bodhisattva superior, you also have something else going on. Great compassion is accompanying it. And we also talked about the 12 sets of 100 qualities too. Seems a little complicated.
Okay. So again, when we talk about this idea that it is conjoined with, let me go to the actual wording that was used in terms of the ultimate, that was what at the top of that page? Yeah, the ultimate ground, seeing the pure nature, reality, divisions are not made, da 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 da. So again, the idea though is that anytime that we talk about the mind of a bodhisattva, there are going to be things that are manifest in that mind, and there are going to be things that are sort of under the surface that are not manifest at that moment. Like the bodhicitta isn't lost when one is in meditative equipoise. It's there under the surface, but it is not appearing to the mind. This is what we mean when we say it's conjoined with great compassion or with the, again, bodhicitta or any of these other sort of qualities that are in the mind of the Mahayanist as they are progressing into the path of seeing and path of meditation. They're going to have those moments of direct insight into emptiness, But that doesn't mean, again, those things have completely disappeared. They're just there in a dormant manner. They're non-manifest. And so we still will delineate that the object that is appearing to that mind in meditative equipoise can only be ultimate truth, can only be emptiness. Whereas once they come out of that and they become aware of the qualities that they possess, these 100 sets of qualities and all these various things that we're going to talk about, those all are manifesting in subsequent attainment. They are something that the Bodhisattva can turn their attention to and realize and talk about, because at that point they're manifest. They're back in the sphere of the understanding, the object of cognition or awareness of the Bodhisattva outside of meditative equipoise. But when they're in meditative equipoise, they aren't even aware of their bodhicitta, in terms of that's not an object that appears to them. But as I said, it's conjoined with or underneath the surface. So
Okay.
we do use this term conjoined with as a way of talking about those qualities. It just means that they're not there manifestly, but they're still there under the surface. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Don.
I think Aphasia had her hand up, perhaps. Yes, Aphasia?
I did. I have
Yeah.
one clarifying question. So when you talk about the uninterrupted path and the path of release, are we working simultaneously on diminishing both afflictive obscuration and cognitive obscurations? Or if we focus on just diminishing the cognitive obscurations, will that take care of the afflictive obscurations?
We're going to get to that in terms of how we progress through these 10 grounds. But let me say for now that you actually have to go sequentially, that you cannot get to removing the cognitive obscurations or the knowledge obscurations until you've removed the afflictive obscurations. So there is a process by which you initially, we're going to see what the path is saying, you remove the very first level of the afflictive obscurations in terms of those that are intellectually acquired, that we have gained in this life through being exposed to false teachings and so on. Then we go on in the remaining, like in the path of meditation, as we enter into that and continue up through the 7th ground, to remove the innate afflictive obstructions. So the afflictive obstructions are removed from the 1st through the 7th ground. Then on the 3 pure grounds, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, is where we remove the cognitive or the knowledge obstructions. And that's because, again, we have to have removed the others first before we can go on to that. And that's just a matter of coarseness. You know, those things that are coarser, which are the actual thought processes by which we are adhering to things as inherently existent, are coarser than this subtle imprint that's on our mind that is causing this false appearance. And so those beings, just as a footnote to this, those beings who go through the Hinayana path, the fundamental vehicle, they're only removing the afflictive obstructions. So they will still have this false appearance because they haven't touched the cognitive obstructions. And as much as the Bodhisattvas would love to remove those right from the beginning, they're blocked from doing that because they have to remove those false conceptions that they are, they're also under the influence of, and then they can remove the subtler stains that cause this dualistic appearance. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Good question. Yeah. And then Doris, I think, had a question. Yeah.
Well, mine isn't as technical as everybody else's. I'm wondering, when in equipoise and realizing emptiness, is there a thought process going on?
In when you're in meditative equipoise?
Yes, and you're having the big moment, you realized emptiness. Is there a thought process?
Well, if by thought you're meaning conceptual awareness, then no, because conceptuality has ceased at that time. There is an experience, but the experience is one that it's called in the traditional texts that teach different modes of awareness. It's called a yogic direct perception. It's yogic in that it is influenced by yogic activities of meditation and so on, and it is a direct perception as opposed to conception, which is always once more knowing things through this medium of a generic image. Remember that on the path of accumulation and path of preparation, even prior to that, the Bodhisattva is only realizing an idea of emptiness. Just like we have everything that appears to our conceptual mind is an idea of that object. I think I pointed this out in a previous class by saying, if you thought about your mother's face right now, whatever is the last image of your mother's face that you're working with as, kind of your memory of your mother's face. Well, it's not your mother's face. It's an idea that your conceptual awareness is working with, a generic image of your mother's face that is somewhat static and unchanging. It doesn't have the qualities that your mother's actual face does if your mother is still alive and you can go see her face. It's changing moment by moment. It's an impermanent phenomenon. But we work in conceptuality with these sort of static images, these ideas of what things are. And that is one of the faults of conception, but it doesn't make conception utterly a wrong consciousness. It only makes it mistaken with regard to how it is knowing things. So when we get into so on the path of accumulation and preparation, you keep working with the conceptual idea of emptiness, and as we mentioned last week, it becomes subtler and subtler. And that was even, I think, an illusion that was made. No, actually, I haven't gotten to that part yet, where there's very, very subtle distinction between subject and object. It's still, the object still has that generic idea, this generic image, and there's a subjective awareness, but it's becoming subtler and subtler. And then when one enters into this meditative equipoise, at least the initial one on emptiness that occurs at the path of seeing, you have that first experience of a non-dual awareness where the object emptiness merges with the mind, and there's no generic image involved. There's no conceptuality involved. So if by the word thought you're meaning conceptual thought, then no. There was conceptual thought that preceded it on that last part. Remember, there are 4 levels of the path of preparation. The last one on and each of these are divided into 3. The last one of the supreme mundane qualities is your realization of emptiness. It starts off conceptual, and then it crosses over and becomes non-conceptual. It's no longer a thought, and you don't have any thought about, oh, I'm in meditative equipoise, or any of that sort of self-awareness that's going on. You're simply the mind merged into this realization of emptiness in a non-dualistic manner. At some point that ceases through the power of that, having entered into that and done the work that you needed to do. You come out into the liberated path, and then you're staying meditating on emptiness, and then you start to come back into a thought process, a conceptual framework. But during meditative equipoise, absolutely not. There would be no thoughts present.
But there's a level of awareness.
Awareness, sure. I mean, you can go back and you say, yeah, that was a pretty wild experience. I'm sure the Bodhisattvas say that when they get on the other side, right? Because it's transformational. It's unlike anything that we've ever had.
I think I meant awareness rather than thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there's an awareness, because the awareness is going through that experience. But it's not like you're framing that experience with like I said, thinking, oh, wow, I must be going through meditative equipoise. If that's going on, then you're not in meditative equipoise, because you can't have a conceptual thought being generated in the space of this direct yogic perception, this direct realization of emptiness. So, okay, so does that clarify then?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, good. Then a question, maybe it's only possible to have that high level of compassion when you can see the emptiness of all those things that are hard to feel compassion for. I agree in terms of many teachers say that, in the Mahayana path, as you go through and get your direct realization of emptiness, that you come out of that with an even deeper level of compassion for beings, because you have seen the truth of how things exist, and you see more clearly then how beings are incredibly misguided then, and really quite unnecessarily so. If they only knew the truth of emptiness, if they only had that wisdom, they wouldn't be suffering for another second, or at least be able to move towards that, freedom from suffering and what have you. But even prior to entering the path, we can meditate on that idea and really begin to inform our compassion with emptiness. This is how Chandrakirti's text actually starts, is by working with 3 levels of awareness of compassion. Great compassion, the great compassion that is simply observing sentient beings as suffering, which is already very, very powerful. The one that observes them in terms of their impermanence, because this is also something that causes a lot of suffering, right? That we are dealing with subtle impermanence, things always changing, but also the gross impermanence of having to die and leave behind, all the things that we're acclimated to and what have you. But then the 3rd level of compassion is where we actually observe them in terms of their lacking inherent existence. We see that they are empty of inherent existence. And therefore, we have even greater compassion for them because, as I said, they're suffering needlessly. If they only knew that truth, they could be free of all of it. So again, I think that it is true to the point, that's being raised with this question that you will develop an even higher level of compassion and your bodhicitta becomes even stronger. This is why, like I said, it becomes greater and greater through these 22 similes as you move through the path, because your wisdom informs your compassion. Now, compassion is a conceptual mind in us, but we need to, again, keep reinforcing especially if we get into the path of seeing and so on, the non-conceptual wisdom realizing emptiness with the conception of compassion and bodhicitta, and reinforcing the two of those. And then when one becomes a Buddha, we'll talk about Buddhahood when we get to the tail end of this text and talk about the resultant ground. The mind of a Buddha doesn't have the conception of compassion, but it is imbued with great compassion, great love, all these amazing qualities. But they have gotten to a point where they're no longer conceptual. The Bodhisattva or the Buddha doesn't need to meditate on compassion or think about compassion. That is the driving force of a Buddha. That is why a Buddha does what a Buddha does, which is appear in various forms for the benefit of others. It's like more of a spontaneous impulse than it is anything that requires any type of conceptual framework. So again, I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure, is that person still here? There, Amanda. Okay, good. I didn't have the first name on there and I wasn't sure whether that was you or who. Okay, yeah. Did that help, Amanda? Yeah, okay, good. All right, any other questions? All right, let's dive back into it. Like I said, I hadn't quite finished in in terms of the text, the little quote that supported this whole idea that we were talking about in regard to these ultimate grounds not being able to be really distinguished in terms of any dissimilar entities, objects of observation, aspects. The quote comes from the Sutra on the 10 Grounds, the Dasha Bhumika Sutra, which says, just as the wise cannot express or see the trail of any bird across the sky, so none of the grounds of conqueror children can be expressed. Then, how can one listen? However, differences between these ultimate grounds are explained in terms of gradual progression of a mere portion of those grounds by way of love, compassion, and aspirational prayers, and not in terms of objects of activity of the mind. So it's kind of interesting. He gives the footnote there, footnote 11 down below on that page, says it's from the book Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism that I cited earlier. That is a translation of Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti's text. In that book, as far as I can tell, this first verse is there, but the second verse isn't there. But it really is reiterating what I said before the break, which is that just as you can't see the trail of a bird across the sky, right? It doesn't leave behind anything that you go, oh, it must have come from over there, and then I see where it went out there, and then it went there. Rather, the bird just, leaves an invisible trail. So too, there's no differentiation between where the Bodhisattva's been in terms of the ultimate grounds. We can't really find any differentiation between what happens on the first ground versus the 10th ground in terms of that, meditative equipoise of emptiness, that ultimate ground. But there are differences, as it says in the second one, in terms of the portions of those grounds where all of these various other qualities that have been informed by the wisdom realizing emptiness become greater, as we're going to see when we get into the individual 10 grounds. So really quickly, I'm just going to share a little bit that comes from that book in terms of Tsongkhapa's commentary on that one verse. He says, though a bird crosses the sky, the wise of the world cannot describe its trail in words or see it in their minds. In the same way, through the ultimate grounds, like birds, progress through the sky of the nature of phenomena, even interpreters who are superiors, again, Aryas, who have that same wisdom, cannot describe the mode of progress in the way that superiors themselves experience it. It's an experience once more that is beyond words. The experience, as Doris's question, there is an awareness that goes through that, but you don't have any real conceptual framework for it because it is this unique experience of the wisdom realizing emptiness. Again, I'm not speaking about it from personal experience, just how it is described. And so it says, thus, listeners cannot hear about the grounds the way they are perceived. That's what that last little bit, then how can one listen? It meant that anyone who listens to anyone talking about this can't really hear about the grounds the way that they are actually perceived and experienced by the consciousness that goes through that meditative equipoise. All right. Now, before I get to those slides, we have a little bit more to go to in terms of the text on page 14 that we're working with. Let me scroll up a little bit here. So this paragraph, nonetheless, until the 10th ground, there is the difference of newly seeing a formerly not seen factor of freedom from adventitious defilements in terms of the pure nature of reality. So what is this saying? It's saying that as you progress, because you are removing, as I alluded to earlier, another layer of the obstructions each time you go through another meditative equipoise that takes you to the next ground, you are seeing a new cessation, a new freedom from the adventitious defilements, whether they be, again, the afflictive obstructions we go through first, or the cognitive or knowledge obstructions we go through at the end. You are aware of those. There is an awareness that you've removed another layer. You're like a little bit freer through the force of your realization of emptiness. So there is that difference that is happening by way of the ultimate grounds. And they say it is even realized to some degree in the ultimate grounds. It's not a conventional phenomenon we're talking about here. It is the cessation that occurs together with that liberated path. That is the freedom from another layer of stuff that we are removing as we progress through the superior grounds. Let's continue with that second line towards the end. For it is said that the exalted wisdoms of meditative equipoise of the 10 grounds have greater and lesser vision in terms of directly realizing the true cessations which were obtained by the uninterrupted paths of the lower grounds, and of not directly realizing the true cessations which will be attained by the uninterrupted paths of the higher grounds. It can only realize what has actually been ceased. It can only see those negations, a cessation of some layer of the obstructions that has already occurred. It doesn't see the cessations that will occur because those haven't occurred yet. Still, Tathagatas, those Buddhas, never move from the meditative stabilization, which directly actualizes the complete perfect truth body, which is the result of removing layer by layer. All those true cessations culminate in the truth body, and by that they mean the nature truth body, which is completely free of all the adventitious defilements. Completely removed those, and of course lacking any inherent existence as well, which is essentially the factor of having abandoned the obstructions, which are predispositions, which are the final obstructions that occur or that are gotten rid of on the 3 pure grounds, as I mentioned earlier. So before I share this quote, I'm going to share a little passage, and I'm taking a chance here because it's a little bit dense, but it's from some of the notes that were put together for the study of the Chandrakirti's texts in a later round of the master's program than the one that I participated in. But nonetheless, I think it is somewhat helpful. And if it's not helpful, don't worry about it. After a bodhisattva attains the uninterrupted path of the Mahayana path of seeing, they attain the liberated path of the first ground, right? We haven't gone into like the individual grounds, but we know that from our chart that once you get through the uninterrupted path, you end up on the other side, which is the path, liberated path, or the path of release. All of those are on the first ground, whereby we can say they see the truth body of the first ground. It is essentially, again, the true cessations that are connected with the initial meditative equipoise that the bodhisattva experiences on the path of seeing. This is the true cessation that is the abandonment of the objects of abandonment of the previous uninterrupted path. Again, the liberated path is where the cessation has actually occurred. The door has been closed. Those things won't return again. The uninterrupted path is where the antidote is developed to those. So what it's saying is that when one achieves the liberated path, you've seen kind of the truth body of the first ground, because you have, to that awareness, there is the negation of that level of obstruction that was abandoned there. And we're going to see what that is in a moment when we get into the path of seeing. Continuing, the Bodhisattva on the liberated path of the path of seeing sees the factor that is the separation from the respective object of abandonment of the uninterrupted path of the path of seeing, but again does not see the factor that is the separation from the object of abandonment of the uninterrupted path of the path of meditation. It can't see what is not yet realized, not yet occurred. It can only know that that level of obstruction that was removed by the uninterrupted path through that antidote, that it's actually ceased, that it's actually gone. And as I said, it does appear to the mind of the Bodhisattva because it is an ultimate truth. Now, there's a debate about whether it's an emptiness or not, but it is an ultimate truth. That true cessation is appearing to the mind of that Bodhisattva in a non-conceptual way. Kind of hard to figure out all this. And again, I'm not a master of any of this because I am nowhere near any of these realizations, but know that this is what is said. And that's why this quote that was, from our text was referring to, is that you have kind of this knowing of this cessation that's occurred on the liberated path that is going to be different from level to level. Why? Because more and more obstructions are removed. However, as soon as they attain the liberated path of the second ground, they also see the factor that is the separation from the respective object of abandonment of the uninterrupted path of the second ground, and so forth. So they have a new knowledge in a sense of the cessation, the true cessation that is a greater cessation than what occurred on the first ground. When they attain Buddhahood, okay, they skip from here from the second ground all the way to Buddhahood. When they attain Buddhahood, they are free from all the objects of abandonment of the uninterrupted paths, right? Because there's nothing more to be abandoned. True cessation has been completely actualized. There are no longer any things to be ceased. So the Bodhisattva's true cessations are likened to a waxing moon in that they increase until they attain the state of Buddhahood, which is likened to the full moon. All right, so that hopefully gives you enough to work with to have some understanding of that. I don't have perfect understanding of this because I still puzzle with the idea of how does the Bodhisattva in Meditative Equipoise on Emptiness have in the liberated path some cognizance of that, because again it's not presented in the traditional teachings as being a conventional truth. It's an ultimate truth, but then it would sound like it's an emptiness. And as I said, that debate, you can get into and read various things on it. It's very hard to kind of get our heads around. But the idea is that there is, through the force of these ultimate grounds, the 10 ultimate grounds that are occurring, there is a change in terms of the level of cessation that has occurred, right? Because every time you realize emptiness directly, that acts as an antidote, you've removed a little bit less of, of the obstructions, and then you've removed a little bit more, and then you removed a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until you've removed them completely. And that's why it said that at that point, the truth body in its entirety appears to you, whereas you've seen kind of the truth body that is a portion of each of those reductions of obstructions. Anyway, that's the best I can explain it. I'm sorry if it's not horribly clear, but let's go through the little citations that accompany that. Moreover, the praise of the element of qualities, the Dharmadhatu Stotra, says, just as the crescent moon is seen to increase day by day, similarly, those abiding on the grounds also are seen to increase in stages. On the 15th day of the waxing moon, the moon becomes complete. Similarly, on the completion of the grounds, the truth body is fully manifest. So that's what that meant. That's why I explained it, is because this paragraph and these quotations are referring to how the truth body of a Buddha is there in essence to some degree with each of these 10 ultimate grounds. But when we get to the final one and remove the last bit, it becomes fully manifest, just like the waxing moon that eventually becomes completely full. Furthermore, although bodhisattvas abiding on the 10 grounds and tathagatas, Buddhas, do not differ with regard to seeing reality directly, they differ in that the former have not abandoned predispositions to ignorance and thus do not see reality for more than a brief time, that brief time being when they're in meditative equipoise on emptiness. As I explained earlier, when they come into subsequent attainment, even if they are a 10th ground bodhisattva, they will still have that influence of the predispositions to ignorance, the knowledge obstructions that cause that dualistic appearance of inherent existence. Whereas, since Tathagatas, Buddhas, have abandoned the predispositions to ignorance exhaustively, they never rise from meditative equipoise realizing emptiness directly. And they know all phenomena in a non-conceptual way. They know all phenomena directly through knowing the minds of all sentient beings. The Sutra on the 10 Grounds says in relation to that, like the sun in the sky where clouds are seen, even you superiors who have the pure eyes of intelligence are of partial intelligence, meaning only if you're a Bodhisattva superior. Whereas if you become a Buddha superior, if you cross over that, final goal of removing the last of the obstructions, then you become Buddha and you have this complete awareness. But you superiors who have, who are only Arya Bodhisattvas, who have the pure eyes of intelligence, are only of partial intelligence. You don't know both truths simultaneously. As he says here, you do not see all. You blessed ones, however, who have the truth body of limitless intelligence, see all the limitless objects of knowledge pervading the expanse of space. Because you've removed all obstructions, you can see both truths simultaneously. So everything we've talked about tonight feeds into, again, this last bit of our text in terms of this introduction to the superior grounds, the divisions. There is a purpose for making the division into the 10 grounds, because for the sake of refuting wrong conceptions of those who do not assert a presentation of 10 grounds in the Mahayana, a division of the Mahayana into 10 grounds is made, having set up as an example the existence of the 8 lower grounds, which are renowned to the Hinayana, the fundamental vehicle follower himself. Again, we skipped over the Hinayana, but if you go back to that page 2 or 3 or something, I can't remember what page it is of our text, you will see, actually it's a little further than 2 or 3, you will see on the beginning of page, bottom of page 4 into the top of page 5, the 8 grounds of the fundamental vehicle. So some people may doubt that the Mahayana has 10 grounds because they use the example of the 8 Hinayana grounds and think that it should be identical for the Bodhisattva on the Mahayana path. But it isn't. The Bodhisattva's 10 grounds are unique to the Mahayana path in the way that they are set out, and they're not like the grounds that are set out for the for the Hinayana practitioner, the fundamental vehicle follower. Then there's a quote from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, which says, just as the 8 fundamental vehicle grounds are explained in the Hera vehicle, similarly, there are 10 Bodhisattva grounds in the Mahayana. Again, different presentations. The 5 paths are somewhat identical in terms of their names, slightly way different in terms of qualities and what have you. But the grounds themselves, there are 8 that are set out for Hinayana, 10 for the Mahayana. Okay, let's try to do just a little bit more to get us into the path of seeing. And how I want to approach this is begin by talking about these initial definitions, and then I'll go to a few slides that help us to understand them a little bit more. When we talk about the actual divisions of the paths, that division into 10 was in terms of the grounds, which again are the supports for the developing of qualities. In terms of the paths, there are only the 2, right? There's the paths of seeing and the paths of meditation. The Mahayana path of seeing, the first of the 2 divisions here. The definition of a Mahayana path of seeing is a Mahayana clear realizer of the truth. So I'm going to talk in a moment when I go to the slides about what we mean by truth. I think it's pretty evident, but nonetheless, I'll go over that. When these are divided, there are the 2, the exalted wisdoms of meditative equipoise and the exalted wisdoms of subsequent attainment of Mahayana paths of seeing, which again, I don't need to explain now because I explained them earlier. And then we go on to define each of those. And before I get into those definitions, and I probably won't get to those until next week, let me just talk a little bit about what we mean about this definition, calling it the clear realizer of truth, as well as the etymology of this. Again, I think these are kind of evident for the path of seeing. In the Tibetan, it's tonglam. Tong means to see. Lam means path, as it always does in these presentations. Bodhisattvas who have newly entered this path have cultivated the meditative equipoise that for the first time sees or directly realizes the emptiness of all phenomena. We can't think of sees in terms of visual. Our visual consciousness isn't what's seeing. It is the mind, mental consciousness that is seeing, realizing emptiness of all phenomena on the path of seeing. Again, as it mentions there, that's only for bodhisattvas who have newly or freshly entered this path. If they have completed the fundamental vehicle, they would, of course, have realized emptiness and had a meditative equipoise previously. So it wouldn't be the initial one, the first time that they are seeing emptiness directly. This is defined, as we saw, as a Mahayana clear realizer of the truth, because truth here refers to the ultimate truth or ultimate mode of existence of all phenomena, that is, emptiness of inherent existence. The meditative equipoise of the path of seeing directly realizes the ultimate truth of all phenomena. So it is a clear realizer of the truth. Again, as I said, no great shakes with this. This isn't telling you anything that you probably couldn't figure out for yourself. What I'm going to do now, and I don't know if I have time to get through all of it, but I'm going to go through Jeffrey Hopkins, at least his initial part of his presentation of what happens on the path of seeing, because I think it will be helpful before we go back into the text. This is from Meditation on Emptiness. He says, during the period of supreme mundane qualities, at the end of the path of preparation, one can no longer ascertain the factors of an object meditated and a subject meditating. However, subtle forms of both still appear. So you've kind of gotten rid of that ascertainment of that, but you're still having a very subtle demarcation of the object emptiness that is being meditated on and the subject of the awareness, the consciousness that is meditating on it. Subsequently, through continuous meditation, kind of staying in that mode of what's happening at that final moments of the path of preparation in the supreme mundane qualities level, all appearances of subject and object are extinguished in suchness, in emptiness, and subject and object become like water poured into water, indifferentiable. Emptiness is then realized directly without the medium of an image. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't have a conceptual image involved. Emptiness and the object realizing it, again, are like water poured into water. And the path of seeing, initial direct cognition of the truth, is attained. Subject and object appear as one. Oh, this is something I threw in from Path to the Middle, because I thought this was really quite interesting. When I first read it many years ago, I was kind of astounded by what's going to come up in like the second slide of this. Subject and object, he says, appear as one. The subject itself is a consciousness, a conventional phenomenon. That should say its own aspect, as consciousness does not appear to it. Does the person then realize emptiness? The person does. For what the consciousness realizes, the person also realizes. So although there's a person there, there's a consciousness there, those are conventional phenomena, those aren't the object of that. They aren't being realized at that time because those are conventional phenomena. What is being realized, of course, is emptiness by that mind. And such a mind, he says, has tremendous power. I love this quote. If an atom bomb were dropped at that time, it probably would not disturb the mind of a person on the uninterrupted path of seeing. So we're talking about, again, a very powerful mind that is involved in this meditation on emptiness, where once it becomes non-conceptual, once that veil of the generic image falls away and emptiness is known directly, that you're in this space of something very profound, that you come out again on the other side totally transformed. Through the path of seeing, a yogi, and we're back in Jeffrey Hopkins now, through the path of seeing, a yogi removes artificial, or we call them again, intellectually acquired conceptions of inherent existence. These are the intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions. Those that are acquired not from beginningless conditioning, those are the innate, but rather from contact with false systems of teaching. Again, we spoke about this earlier a few weeks ago when we looked at, this was a slide from session 2, right? That we talked about the 2 categories of afflictive obstructions. This was the first one. Intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions, or again, artificial is Jeffrey Hopkins' word, which are those afflictions and their seeds developed under the influence of philosophical, religious, scientific, or even cultural beliefs and views. All these things that we get reinforced in this life that cause us to reify the sense of self that we think is there inherently. The innate aren't even touched at this level of the path of seeing, only the acquired or the artificial. So he compares it again to the innate. He says, false teachings do fortify the innate misconception of the inherent existence of persons and other phenomena, which is acquired from beginningless misconception of the nature of things. And that, the innate, are overcome on the path of meditation through continuous conditioning to the truth. Again, I didn't put up the definition for the description for the innate. It just simply means inborn. It's what we've had since beginningless time, that we carry over from life to life, that they will be removed after we initially remove the artificial ones, the intellectually acquired ones that we gained in this lifetime. Why? Because again, they are coarser. These are subtler. Okay. I'm wondering if I should continue or not. Let me do just one or two more slides. The meditative equipoise of the path of seeing, as we saw with all of these meditative equipoises, is divided into two parts. An uninterrupted path that abandons here the artificial afflictions or the artificial afflictive obstructions, and a path of release, that is the state of having abandoned those artificial afflictions, the state of, again, having closed the door so that they don't recur again. An uninterrupted path is so named because, without interruption or interval, a yogi will pass on to a path of release that is a condition of having been released from these afflictions. It's a state. It is a negation, again, a lack of that level existing in one's continuum any longer. The uninterrupted path of a path of seeing corresponds, this is where I'm going to have to let it go, to the 8 forbearances, and the path of release corresponds to the 8 knowledges. And that's a preview of what's to come, because I think we're all a little too baked for me to get into that at this point. But these are another way of talking about what happens in the 2 parts of the meditative equipoise of the path of seeing, that is that initial direct realization of emptiness. Again, there's the uninterrupted path, which is the direct cognition of emptiness that acts as the antidote to that level of obstructions, which in this case is just those that were intellectually acquired in this life. And then you have the liberated path, the path of release, where those are, you have the state of them being gone. They have ceased. That again is that taste of the truth body, if you will, a portion of the truth body, because it's a true cessation of a portion of the afflictive obstructions. In this case, again, just the artificial or the intellectually acquired ones. But I'll get into this 8 knowledges, 8 forbearances, those things in the next class. It's not horribly complicated, but they are mentioned in our text, but they're not explained at all. At the very bottom of page 15 is the word 8, and then you see they appear at the next top, and then we'll go into those. But I'm going to continue kind of in the next one, going through the remainder of the commentary from Jeffrey Hopkins. We'll kind of back up a little bit and start from the beginning of Jeffrey Hopkins, so you get kind of his presentation of the path of seeing, and then we'll relate it back to our text. And I think that'll be a helpful way of doing this. So. All right, any comments on tonight? As I said, it gets a little more technical as we get into some of this, but this is kind of, in my estimation, this is like the most difficult part, because you start talking about this new terminology. I know there's a lot of terms I've thrown out. I will get all these slides in a corrected manner with all my little errors corrected to Mary, and she'll get that out in the Dropbox, so you can take a look at that before next week if you wish. And then once we get through the path of seeing, it's not that there's nothing left that's complicated, but the 10 grounds themselves is a really relatively easy presentation, because you just start talking about what transpires in these modes of subsequent attainment, in a sense of what greater qualities the Bodhisattva has when they come out of that meditative equipoise through the force of having removed another layer of the obstructions. So, all right. I hope it's all been very clear. I don't know. I have no idea how clear it's been. I work hard to get it as clear as possible, but obviously, again, with the terminology, it's always something we have to work with a little while to get our heads around. So, okay. If there are no questions, then I think we will just go forward with doing our final prayers. So, John, if you could put those on the screen. Again, bring to mind our motivation of bodhicitta for having engaged in this class tonight, that we have this strong wish to be of great benefit to all sentient beings. And therefore, we want to make sure that all of this merit that we've created, influenced by that mind, doesn't go to waste, but rather brings forth the greatest possible result. So that's the intention behind this prayer. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Then recalling Bodhichitta and how important it is that this mind grow and develop, not just now before entering the path, as well as throughout the path, and those 22 similes, it's ways that it continues to become stronger and stronger. Make the strong prayer, the strong aspiration that this grow like that in your own mind, but also grow in the minds of all sentient beings. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then we go on to our second part of our dedications, which is working with dedicating this positive potential for the good health and long lives of our teachers. From their side, they're enlightened beings. They're truth bodies that are out there in this perfect form, but they want to help us. So we have to create the causes from our side for these beings to help us. So as we recite these prayers for these three teachers, think that we're creating the causes for all spiritual guides to continue to benefit us and others in all of our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then lastly for Tenzin Osalhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Thank you for those, John. Let's finally dedicate for all those beings that we're holding in our hearts right now. Again, there's just so much we can think about in terms of even those beings we don't know who were involved in last week's shooting, as well as this recent shooting in the United States. All of those who we do know who are involved in various forms of suffering, experiencing obstacles in their life, those who are ill, those who are dying or who have died recently. Send this positive potential out to them, gladly sharing it with them, giving it all away to them, so they can be free from their suffering and can find everything that will lead them to true peace and happiness. And then may this happen for all sentient beings in this way as well. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I hope you're enjoying this little foray into the grounds and paths. I'm certainly enjoying teaching it, but I again hope that my presentation is of some use, some benefit. So, all right, everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you all again soon. Okay.
Thank you.